As ForestEthics Forestry Advisor to the Coast Campaign from 2006 to 2009, her work with forest companies resulted in FSC certification of nearly 1 million hectares of forest in the Great Bear Rainforest. She also worked with coastal First Nations communities to build their capacity to implement the Great Bear Rainforest agreements in their territories and to explore conservation-based economic opportunities. She is a registered professional forester in British Columbia. Please welcome Karen Tam Wu.
So this is almost what it's like standing up here and not being able to see out there. I was going to title this presentation From the Headwaters to the Hague, but as I started putting the slides together, I realized what I want to explain and tell you a bit more about is actually a bunch of coincidences of events over the last 10 years or so, and they're interestingly connected by salmon. So in the early 2000s, my husband and I moved to Terrace, which is on the Skeena River in northwest British Columbia. And this is a photo of Butsy Rapids in Prince Rupert. Little did I know that learning to kayak in the Northwest and becoming familiar with this region would become really important to my work. This is a photo of a surfing trip that we did in Central America about 7.5, 8 years ago. And this is where I heard about this dream job of mine with ForestEthics. They were looking for someone who was familiar with forestry and had a background in forest certification and an interest to work with First Nations. Needless to say, I did get the job, and within a few months, I found myself commuting to work in float planes to remote islands in the Great Bear Rainforest, and I shared an office with the spirit bear. So who was I going to complain to be fed salmon and freshly dug clams and freshly caught crabs in these amazing areas? And I was really fortunate to be able to work with communities in the north where they're experiencing amazing cultural revival. This is a photo from Bella Bella, with the home of the Celtic Nation, and this was from the opening of one of the first big houses they had built in over 100 years. But while I was working in the Great Bear Rainforest, back in Terrace, there was a storm brewing, and it was around salmon. When we lived up there, there was hardly any sense of environmental activism. But when it comes to salmon, it seems the communities up north get really pissed off when their salmon is threatened. And so the threat that they were facing was one that was here in the Sacred Headwaters, which is where, unbeknownst to me, living in Terrace and being a kayaker, the Skeena, the Nass, and the Siskiyne were born, or are born, in the same area. And this is where Shell wants to try to frack for gas. And the Sacred Headwaters is really a place of origins. It's a place where creation stories for the Tahltan First Nations, as well as many other First Nations in the Northwest. And it is a place where the Tahltan learn to hunt and where they collect plants, and where they share their traditions and their language with their people. So you can see why the Tahltan would want to blockade the road from Shell going in there. Well, Shell did get in there in 2005 and were able to put in 3 test wells. And they had plans to drill 14 more. At full commercial scale, their operations would have seen over 4,000 wells like this built and over 3,000 kilometers of roads built, which is further than the distance from Vancouver to San Diego. So salmon, I mean, you can imagine the impact on the landscape, not to mention the impact to salmon. And salmon feeds people. It's also the basis of the culture for these Northwest communities. And then I realized a couple summers ago when I went back to the Great Bear Rainforest that salmon also feeds wolves and bears, and the nitrogen from the salmon also feeds the rainforest. So the salmon that would spawn back in the headwaters of the Skeena River in the Sacred Headwaters would eventually go back out to the Great Bear Rainforest and feed not only communities downstream along the way, but also all these amazing creatures that live on the coast where I once used to work. The communities who live in the north obviously know the value of the salmon, and so they took to the streets. When they heard what the Tahltan were standing up for and standing up against, the communities along the Skeena rivers, along the Nass and in the Stikine took to the streets. This is a photo of a rally in Smithers. And this is when ForestEthics and I got involved. So I then I found myself working and going to work to scheme. How could we stick it to Shell and make sure that we took the issues that a small unknown corner of British Columbia was being heard right at the head of Shell? So we found out that the CEO of Shell was going to be in Montreal, and that previous photo was my colleague giving the CEO of Shell a little notice of what we thought about his proposed project. And then next, I happened across a group of amazing volunteers in the Netherlands, and we found out that Shell was hosting a gas conference, and so we asked our volunteers to attend that gas conference. And then a few summers ago, I went to the shareholders meeting at The Hague, and we staged a little theater performance to show the shareholders what impacts the wildlife and the salmon would face if Shell's plans went through to frack in the Sacred Headwaters. But while I was there, I couldn't pass up the opportunity to myself to meet the CEO myself and present him with a model of a dead salmon that we dubbed the Bad Gas Award. So we waited for the AGM to conclude their business, and we were able to stalk the CEO, and then I gave him our nice little model of a salmon. So, going to the Netherlands is all fine and everything for work, but of course, I gotta have some fun at work, and so here I am finding myself on a kayak trip in the upper Skeena River a couple summers ago. So this is where I said kayaking came in handy on the job. And Ali Howard swam the entire length of the Skeena River in 2009 to raise awareness. So we thought that we needed to ramp it up a little bit, and we decided that we needed to actually grow the number of voices that were being heard by Shell. So from a handful of people blockading the road to a few hundred people in communities in the Northwest to over 60,000 people who added their names to our petition from Abbotsford to Zurich. And this is the Italy part of the banner. That banner was 50 feet long and 4 feet wide at about 10-point font. And I never got to realize my dream of hanging this banner off the Westin Hotel directly across from Shell's headquarters, but we did present that banner to the president of Shell, and that was really the tipping moment that concluded to December's announcement of the Sacred Headwaters being protected from Shell's plan to frack. So Winston Churchill once said that some people dream of success and others wake up and work really hard to achieve it. And this is a story of how when we stand together with people like many of you in this audience, we can achieve success. Thank you very much.